Bob, you mentioned that the pots that you found were in the different homes were utilitarian. Were they also used for ceremony and religious reasons?
Pottery had a very big function in their ceremonial or their ceremonies. Occasionally, when they are finished being used in a ceremony, they're taken out of that context and they're put into more of a secular setting. And there are situations that those ceremonial pots can be bought without offending anybody. And a lot of times the pots that were used in the kivas or in ceremony were often designed by the men, largely because a lot of the women, depending on the ceremonies, couldn't go into the kivas. So a lot of the ceremonial pottery were made by men and designed by men.
That was one of my questions, if the women were the primary potters, so that answers that one. How were the pots made?
Well, they've been traditionally made for the last 1,500 years through the coil method. They would go out and find the clays, and then they would add a temper, and they would coil their pots and smooth out the coils with maybe a piece of ear of corn or a gourd. And once they're smooth, then they would find a natural pigment where they would paint the designs on. And normally in the early days there was very little availability of different colors. So primarily you would see grays, whites, and blacks. And then as time passed, more colors were introduced, like reds and yellows. And then they were fired naturally in pits outdoors. And largely up until about 50 or 40 years ago, that process hadn't changed.
But they still use that to some degree, don't they? The same process?
Yeah.
Some contemporary pottery?
Some of the potters still, I would say of all the potters, there's probably only, depending on the pueblo, there's probably only 20-30% of the pottery being made is traditionally done.
What characteristics define historic pottery versus contemporary?
It's probably mostly the look and the shape. As you can expect, pottery made back in the 1200 and 1300 era were made basically for use, but they also took great pride in what they made, and they made a lot of it for trade amongst themselves. A lot of it was very decorative, and that was the type of pottery that was probably traded. So in the early days you had certain forms and certain designs, and then with the advent of people moving into the area, like the Santa Fe Trail in 1821, you get a lot of traders that were introducing things, and so the Indians had a lot more outside influence, and because of that, some of the pottery shapes changed, some of the designs changed. And so you can actually tell by the shapes and styles the difference between a historic and contemporary pot.